Once again, welcome. My name is Brian Geary. I'm the Communications Director at Pearson College. And my guest today is Anita George. She's year 9, 1979 from India. And she's talking to us from Delhi. And I'm very grateful that she has the opportunity to speak with us because we're recording this on April 22nd, which is Earth Day, coincidentally. And just a few days ago, Anita, Delhi and several other major cities, I believe, in India went into a full lockdown because of the COVID situation. How are you coping? How are your colleagues coping? How is your family coping?
Thank you very much, Brian. And it's really a pleasure and a privilege for me to have this chance to speak to you and through you to the rest of the college. Things here are pretty bad. I think this is the worst I've seen it to date, and we've seen pretty hard times. This time it seems as if the virus is becoming smarter, more contagious, more cunning. And so the impact is really being felt all across the country. In Delhi, in particular, we have more than 20,000 cases every day. And the hospitals are at full capacity. And I've had the unfortunate experience of trying to find an ICU hospital bed for a colleague. And I had to spend almost 10 hours on the phone before we could find one. So while things are very, very difficult, what strikes me a lot is how good people are and how helpful they've been. And we've had a lot of really human acts of kindness, which gives me hope and faith that we'll come out of this.
I think we really need to see a lot and hear a lot of those stories and anecdotes about how people are stepping up to help each other. And certainly the references you make to searching for ICUs and shortages of oxygen, we've been reading a number of those kinds of stories. And I almost feel a little chagrined at talking to you during this time when things are in such bad shape about something as frivolous as, shall we say, as we are. But let us carry on anyway and have a degree of normality, I guess, I suppose.
Yes, yes. No, I think we have to do that, Brian. Those of us who are well and able to, we have to keep going on and helping as much as we can.
Mhm. Tell me about your role. Now, you're the Executive Vice President and Deputy Head of CDPQ Global. First of all, can you tell us what CDPQ is?
So CDPQ is Caisse de dépôt et placement du Québec. It's the pension fund manager for 41 different pension plans in Quebec, both public, quasi-public, as well as some insurance companies. We manage about Canadian dollars 365.5 billion across various asset classes like infrastructure, real estate, private equity, listed equities, and fixed income. And one of my roles as part of CDPQ Global is the globalization of our investments beyond Canada. And we have almost 2/3 of our assets under management invested outside of Canada.
Mhm.
So that's a big role we play. But I have to say something unique about CDPQ compared to all other pension funds is that we have a dual mandate in that we have to earn reliable returns for our depositors, the 6 million Quebecers. But we also have a responsibility to contribute to the economic development of Quebec. And that actually makes us very different because no matter where we invest, we have that development hat always.
Mhm.
And we look at impact and we look at what exactly, where are we putting our money and how is it helping the community, the people, as well as the country.
Well, I have noticed, I have the impression, just looking at CDPQ material, is that there seem to be increasing investments in Asia Pacific, Latin America, and those parts of the world. And Is that a focus of your role as global vice head of CDPQ Global?
So I have played many different roles. I've evolved in CDPQ, and I feel very privileged and fortunate to. I started off as opening the India office for CDPQ, so I was the managing director for South Asia. And then 9 months later, in 2017, I took over all emerging markets, which is both Latin America as well as Asia Pacific.
Mhm.
And the unique thing that we did was that we said in these markets in particular, I would say all over the world, but particularly in emerging markets, we would invest through partnerships. So we build long-term partnerships with like-minded partners who share the same values as we do. And so we became the Emerging Markets and Strategic Partnerships Group. And then in 2020, during the COVID, I think COVID for us was really an eye opener. It's, I would say, a great equalizer in some sense, a great humanizer. And what we decided was that instead of having, a compartment for emerging markets and another for developed markets, that we should really be looking holistically. And that's where the birth of CDPQ Global happened. And we look at all our investments, whether in developed, emerging, emerged, and those lines, as you know, have become more fuzzy.
Exactly.
So that gives us a good opportunity to really learn from our investments across the globe and to connect the dots, especially between our different partners. And more we find that a lot of what we do is global, whether it's being done in India or China or Latin America.
Well, that sort of ties into my next question because I've read material about how the organization is leveraging investments in priority areas, including climate change, climate justice, diversity, and governance. Let's be frank, pretty well every organization talks a good game in that respect, but tell us about CDPQ and specifically how they're focusing to use the massive investment portfolio to support those kinds of priorities.
So I have to say, and I'm extremely proud, and so you have to forgive me if I sound like I'm bragging, but CDPQ, it's in our DNA. So back in 2006, we were one of the first institutional investors who joined up in the UN with the Principles of Responsible Investment, PRI. So it dates back to 2006. And then in 2017, since 2015, I would say we were trying really to create a coalition of pension funds and other institutional investors to explicitly have targets and disclosure on climate and our investments, the nature of our investments.
Mm-hmm.
But we found it very difficult in the beginning. So in 2017, we decided as an organization that we would, lead by example. And so we set targets to reduce our carbon intensity by 25% by 2025, and also increase green investments by 80% by 2020. And we've exceeded both targets, where today our carbon intensity has come down by 23%.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to, do more, and our clean investments are double of what we had targeted. So we have already done about 30 billion of clean investments. And, Brian, I would say the reason why this is not just, the fad of the moment is that when we introduced this in 2017, we also introduced something called the carbon factor, which is a measure by a metric by which our variable pay is influenced by how we perform on these targets. So every department has its carbon intensity and green targets. And if we, each one of our remuneration, variable pay, is based on whether we meet that carbon target or not. So if we exceed it, we can do better than we would have. If we do not meet it, we actually get penalized. So even the youngest analyst in my team is very concerned about what we are investing in. So in a way, we are literally putting our individual money where our mouth is. And to me, that's really a sign that the whole organization is geared and aligned to work towards achieving those targets. The other happy thing I would say is that by leading by example, we were able then to bring together 14 other institutional investors in a network that we call the Investor Leadership Network. And we have 3 pillars that we jointly work on, and we have a joint assets under management of $5 trillion US. And we are focusing on climate change. In climate change, really on measurement, disclosure, and verification by third parties, so that we cannot, it's not just talk. Then the second thing is on diversity and inclusion. And here again, CDPQ has been in the forefront. We just launched in the middle of the pandemic a fund called 25 to the power of 3, which focuses on small and medium enterprises who can access this $250 million fund if they can show us the path towards having 25% diversity and inclusion at the management, board, and shareholder level. So that's the 25 to the power of 3. And we are seeing a lot of traction. And this is, I would say, one of the first funds of its kind, but it's a harbinger of what's to come in the future. And the third plank that we work on is creating infrastructure capacity. And we think it's so important to have that infrastructure capacity capability, not just for ourselves as institutional investors, but we focus on building capacity in emerging markets. So we are doing that, sharing our experience, bringing people, of course, prior to COVID, bringing people from other countries to share what we have been able to do in infrastructure and to learn from them what they have been doing. So those are the 3 pillars. And the last thing I would say is this 2021, we created a group called the Maple 8, which are the 8 Canadian pension funds. And we've all again come together and committed to climate, diversity and inclusion, and governance, following the highest standards of governance for ourselves and for our portfolio companies.
It's important to make those points because people don't normally associate investment funds with the well-being and the social good and social justice. So thank you for outlining those in detail. In fact, I would venture to say that in Canada, most people probably don't have an understanding of what CDPQ is or the role that it plays or the commitments that it's made. So that's very interesting. I'm just going to touch on, prior to joining that organization, you worked at the World Bank. The World Bank has goals of reducing extreme poverty and improving shared prosperity. Is there a direct line from that sort of ethos to what you're doing now?
Absolutely, because I think reducing poverty and increasing shared prosperity is something that, again, comes from that global perspective, where we want to do that not just in developing countries, but across the world, right? So I had the opportunity in the World Bank and in IFC to focus on the developing countries, and I have the privilege now to also do the same across the globe, across developed and developing countries. And I think that's the approach we have to take. Especially if there's anything that COVID has taught us, it is that we need to do this globally. It's not just in one part or the other of the world.
Well, it's terribly obvious of me to say this, but I mean, this seems consistent with UWC values, and we'll talk about sort of where those your UWC and Pearson experience perhaps influenced you in those in a minute. But I'm going to pivot for a second for a bit of an off the wall question. A few days ago, I came across an article written in 1996 by a Canadian writer and pundit. He wrote a column about how he was grilled by Pearson students on a visit when he came to campus. So let me ask you, do you hope that you one day are going to be able to have a chance to return to campus and be grilled by whatever cohort of students are here at this time? Again, and I say, having seen students in action grilling some well-known and capable people. So we'd certainly welcome you to come back.
So if you are trying to deter me, Brian, I'm even more excited to come. I really would love to come. I've, always remember my Pearson years as, in some ways, when I was in the most beautiful part of the world. It's unbelievable. And then on top of that, to have the opportunity to meet other students like myself from so many different countries is just almost like a dream world, right? So I would be so happy to be challenged, to be grilled, to be toasted by my fellow students of Pearson College. I think it will be really a fun thing, as well as I'm very curious also to know, what do the students of today at Pearson College think about? What do they feel? What are the things that are top of their minds?
Uh, I don't think you'd be surprised. I think you'd recognize a lot of the things that they're concerned about. So post-COVID, we will welcome you with open arms, believe me.
Thank
Let,
you.
us go back to your experience in Pearson in the late 1970s. How did you find out about UWC, and how did you subsequently find yourself at Pearson?
So I have a totally serendipitous story. So one of my friends in high school lived in a house which was next to the house where the interviews of the United World College admissions took place. So she was a curious person, and she found out, and she came and she told me, I found out about this school and you have to apply with me. And I told her, I'm from a conservative family, so I told her, oh, there's no chance in hell that my parents would. I was 16, and she insisted. And so I went to my parents, and first I had to convince them that I would never get in because there was so much of competition. And then I had to convince them that even though I would never get in, it was a good thing for me to do because it would give me experience.
That's quite a strategic approach.
Yes, yes. The only thing was that, I come from a large family, and my dad used to keep files on all of us, all our achievements and our little medals and whatever we got. And he also had a file for the dog, our dog. And so in my nervousness, I picked up the dog's file. And then the interview was held in a house, in the house of the Secretary of Education. And I tripped on the entrance. My file went flying, and it was all the dog's rabies injections, vaccination. So the whole interview panel kind of had a good laugh, and they kept asking me what the connection was. And so I had to think on my feet and tell them how the dog was so integral to growing up and who we were. And so I thought it was important to show them his credentials.
Breaking the ice with an interview panel and using a little humor, even unintentional, is an excellent way to start.
Yes, yes. And after that, I was so relaxed because I said, after all these faux pas, if they do select me, the chance was very slim, but if they do, I'd be really lucky. And I was. And it was an amazing experience. It was the first airplane ride I ever took.
Mhm.
When I reached Vancouver, there was a gentleman from Prince Edward Island. and he had that on his suitcase, and I thought he was Prince Edward. And so many such, first times, which really took me out of my little shell and brought me into the world of, Pearson College and the UWC, which was life shaping, life forming for me.
During those 2 years, is there anything or anyone who stood out for you? And I always ask this question when I talk to alumni, and sometimes they're reluctant to say, well, so-and-so had a big impression on me, but feel free to say that or just say it was everyone.
Well, I guess one of the people that really created for me a chain of friendships was a student, a fellow student who was from Israel.
Mhm.
And her mother was from Mumbai, Jewish from Mumbai, who had met her Italian father, and they both met in Israel and got married. And my friend was the outcome of that. And she spoke fluent Hebrew, but because she lived outside of Tel Aviv, her English wasn't that great. So we spent a lot of time together. We wrote our extended essays, and she was writing on the kibbutz system. So I learned a lot from her. We had students from the PLO, and to me, it was such an eye opener how passionately both sides felt about their issues. So it was really getting into the Middle East 101
Mhm.
with individuals who had lived through it, and really trying to understand, how does it so happen? How can things fracture, people and young people so severely? And so for me, it was really an eye opener. And just to tell you the story, that Silvana used to go to a Jewish Aliyah center in Vancouver, and there was a young woman there, a Canadian woman, and she was helping Silvana with her English and editing and things like that. I then went to Smith College to do my undergraduate in the United States. And this friend who had helped Silvana, her name is Frances Lefcourt, also came to Smith. And when she heard me speak, she thought I sounded so much like Silvana because she had picked up all her English from me with my Indian intonation and accent. And so she walked up to me and she asked me, "Do you know Silvana Hayami?" And I was so overjoyed because, you're alone and you're in this big new school.
Of
And
course.
I had an instant friend, and you'll be happy to know that we've all stayed friends right to this day.
Oh, that's wonderful. What a beautiful outcome to a time that was quite a few decades ago, wasn't it?
Yes,
Oh.
yes, yes,
Well, well, to bring it around the full circle and to bring it back to today, now you recently, late last year, joined the board of directors of Pearson College.
yes.
So tell us in a few words, what is your motivation in joining the board, and how do you feel you can best contribute?
So, all through my life, I've been very aware of the influence and the opportunity that Pearson gave me. But since I'm a workaholic by nature, and plus I had, my family, my two kids, and so life was very busy, and and I'm very bad at social media. So I even remember a conversation on Facebook where my Pearson friends were all debating as to what I was doing. And even though I chanced on that conversation, it was so much fun to just let them all everyone had a theory of where I had ended up. But after a while, I fessed up and I said, "This is who I am and where I am." Having said that, when I heard about the opportunity at the Pearson College, and here also there is some serendipity. So when I came to do my interview with Caisse de Depot, My last interview was with Michael Sabia, who, as you know, was the CEO at that time. So I Googled him, and right at the end, it said that he's married to Hillary Pearson. So I Googled her, and then I found out that she's the granddaughter of Lester B. Pearson. So I was so ecstatic, and I shared that with Michael at the end of my interview. I told him, I have a connection with your wife. And he introduced me to her, and we became very good friends. And she's the one who told me about the opportunity. And I was so honored. And so I'm so thankful, because it gives me a chance to give back in a very small way for all the wonderful things that I gained from Pearson College.
Well, again, I didn't know that backstory, and that's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful that those Pearson connections, no matter how tenuous sometimes, bring you around to this kind of role. Um, and I'll just briefly ask you about the role too, because we talked about governance a little bit earlier, but organizational governance isn't the most compelling of subjects, I guess, to people. People don't necessarily have a clear understanding of what a board's role is at an institution like Pearson, which is a nonprofit, charitably registered educational institution. So how would you explain the board's role, your role, to, let's say, for example, a Max Bell Theater full of Pearson students who are ready to grill you?
Okay, so to start off with, I would say we are a group of people, all the board members of Pearson College, who are predominantly very passionate and committed to the mandate and the vision of Pearson College. And I say that because this is something that everybody volunteers and does, but with a lot of commitment, a lot of passion, and a lot of, I would say, bringing in the values and the ideals of Pearson College.
Mm-hmm.
And a board in any institution, and I would say more so in an educational nonprofit organization, is critical, because the role we play is one of, first and foremost, making sure that we are aware of who are the different stakeholders. And in this instance, we have many. And we need to be able to be responsible to all of those stakeholders. We, of course, have very specific things like overseeing operations of the college, the fiduciary responsibilities. So I, for example, I'm on the audit and finance committees. So we look at all the money flows, the numbers, and it is a real responsibility, and you have accountability that you have to know what they are and how things are progressing and where money is being spent. So there's legal aspects, there's, I would say, practical aspects, there's financial and fiduciary aspects, as well as, ethical. And that, from a governance point of view, for me, and I think for all our board members, is really the foundation. Building trust with all our stakeholders, building that relationship of trust, I think, is very important. And I would say to use our resources, our knowledge to add value. It's not just to come and nitpick or, sort of cast aspersions. It's more to really take things to a higher plane to make sure that we also add value to the wonderful work that the management team does at Pearson College, and the teachers and staff at Pearson College.
Well, thank you. And it's important to understand that distinction, that a board provides guidance and direction um, based on the best interests of an organization, but it's the people on the ground, and it's the people that I work with every day who are implementing that guidance and making it real. So thank you.
Absolutely, Brian. And I have to really, I'm so impressed. You see, when I was at Pearson before, I was probably too young to realize the caliber and quality of teachers and individuals like yourselves and what you contribute to the college. And today I can see that, and I'm super impressed.
Well, we're very lucky to have, excuse me, a number of people, particularly in the faculty, who are just so outstandingly dedicated to the educational offerings that we have. I know time is running short. I just have one more question. I had a really lengthy preamble to that question, but I'm going to cut all of that out. Um, and I guess I will put you on a spot a little bit again as well. Strategically, we're looking at a couple of main focuses. One of them is obviously reconciliation with First Peoples in Canada. And we're looking at it in the context of the whole diversity, equity, and inclusion question. We're also looking at our responsibility as shepherds, I guess, of the place where we are. Again, our campus is on the unceded territory of the Chicano First Nation, and we're very deeply involved with the First Nation and land negotiations that they have underway with the federal government in Canada and the provincial administration in Canada. So it's much of this has given us pause, and we've had to ask hard questions of ourselves, and we've had to rethink our role. Given your life, your work experience, and the fact we only have a few minutes to wrap up this session, what advice would you offer in those areas to Pearson leadership, to Pearson faculty, staff, and students?
I think the first thing which has always centered me all through my professional life has been putting people's lives first. And I think, however good a business person you are, or a professor or a teacher, to put the lives of people first, I think, is absolutely critical. And then everything else falls into place. I would say transparency and trust is very, very important, because it's the sort of thing that you build over many, many years, but you can lose it in a flash. So putting that front and center is critical. Communication. So oftentimes our intentions are very good, but if you don't communicate, they don't get heard. And so communicating with all stakeholders, and also I would say listening, and listening really with empathy, where you are not just saying, okay, I have to hear this person out, so let me do that. Really putting yourselves in that person's shoe and hearing what they have to say, I think is something which has given me a lot of it's like a way to really learn more and to contribute better. So I would say that's important. And the last thing I would say is really empathy, because especially post-COVID, I think for all of us, I come from the investment world, which is, the hard nuts and bolts and money and numbers and dollars. I think we really do have to bring forward empathy. And on the Shiano Nation, and I think we have so much to learn. And, these are some of the qualities and values that we can learn a lot more from the Indigenous people in where the college is. In fact, I was totally unaware till I joined the board. So for me, it's also been a very, very, I would say, instructive and moving experience to learn this. And I'm trying to learn more. And the last thing I would say is that, learning is what I loved about learning at Pearson College was the fact that it was experiential. I had so many wonderful teachers who taught you by doing, by being an example. Just the fact that we were all living together from so many different cultures and countries, that was the most amazing learning experience any young person could have. So I'm eternally grateful to Pearson College.
So no matter if you go to school in Pearson or you work at Pearson, it's a lifelong learning commitment, huh? Clearly.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Anita George, thank you very much. You've been exceptionally generous with your time, and we want to let you get back to the priorities, the important priorities, to deal with the situation in Delhi. So We give best wishes to you and your family and everyone in Delhi and everyone in India. We hope that that COVID situation is resolved. As soon.
I sincerely hope so too, Brian. And I want to actually make an offer since we are living in a virtual world. So anyone who wants to grill me virtually is most welcome. And I would be honored to be able to have those conversations. So thank you very much.
We will have those conversations. Thank you very much, Anita. Good health. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Brian. Bye.